Okay, have a look at this family tree just here. This is 5,700 years old. It's very accurate. It's worked out using DNA, which links obviously all of the people in this big family just here, and it relates to the Long Barrow that sits just behind me. This is Gloucestershire, just north of the hamlet of Hazleton. Not much remains of this Long Barrow, but it was there. You can just about make it out. Well, this family tree from this Long Barrow just here, well, it has a problem. First of all, compare this to a family tree that you may have done for your family in recent times. Looking at your own personal lineage and ancestry, by and large it will look a little different to this, a little more structured and perhaps not quite as much polygyny. Perhaps. Now that's not hugely surprising for the era that we're talking about. There is, however, one more thing. You see, these people from this Long Barrow, these faceless people, these are real humans, real lives, real struggles, and they came across from continental Europe, and these are amongst the first people to start agriculture on this land. And here we have one man who sits right at the top, and perhaps he was literally one of those very first people to make that trip from continental Europe over here and start the Neolithic. We can glean so much information from this one family tree, and we'll come to that very shortly. But one question remains with this family tree, one problem remains with this family tree, one that we've yet to fully understand and appreciate even today. Welcome to the story of the world's first family tree. Since the retreat of the ice across Britain from around 10,000 BC, the land was occupied by people known as a Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age, let's say 10,000 to 4,000 BC. A group of highly adaptable people. They would be mobile, they would hunt, they would follow migrating animals, they would fish, they would gather wild plants. They lived a nomadic lifestyle, temporary shelters, temporary settlements, an existence that perhaps moved with the rhythm of the land itself. Now that sustained them, that way of life, for 6,000 years, and if time is a measure of success, well, the people of the Mesolithic period, they certainly were successful. And then came 4,000 BC and, well, things would change. Everything would change for these people. In fact, these early Britons, everything that they knew about the land, the way they worked it, their culture, their lives, everything would pretty soon come to an end, perhaps within just 200 or 300 years. Incoming Neolithic settlers from continental Europe migrated into Britain, and with them they brought agriculture, pottery and domesticated animals. This was a long-term transformative time. The day of the Mesolithic Britons was over with almost the snap of a finger. 3,800 BC, and with the arrival of the Neolithic people, well, we start to see Britain's first monuments in the landscape. Whatever they are, religious, ceremonial, who knows, but we start to see causewayed enclosures, we start to see Cursus monuments, and of course we start to see these, the Long Barrow. For me, the Neolithic era is perhaps one of the most fascinating, I guess, because for the first time in millennia we're starting to see the way people lived, and we're starting to see what they held dear. These little strands of information are slowly coming alive, and even as recently as 2021 with some huge advances in DNA studies. And we've learned about this. Long barrows are one of the most iconic features of the British Neolithic landscape. Built between 3,800 and 3,400 BCE, these elongated earthen or stone mounds survived as communal burial sites for the early farming communities. Often situated on prominent ridges or hillsides, they are not just tombs but expressions of identity, memory and ancestral connection. Unlike later individual graves, long barrows typically housed the remains of multiple people. Whilst their original appearance varied across regions, long barrows typically consist of an elongated earthen mound, sometimes over 70 metres in length, often flanked by ditches and containing stone or timber-lined burial chambers. These chambers were usually located at one or both ends of the mound and accessed through passageways or forecourts. Constructed using local materials, the mounds were carefully built, with some displaying internal structures such as dry stone walling or wooden partitions. Though now often reduced by time and erosion, these monuments would have once stood prominently in the landscape, marking territory and commemorating the dead through impressive enduring architecture. So Hazelton North actually sits in the middle of this field, not the one that I spent most of the day pointing at, 60 metres away by the road. I was led to believe that was the northern one, and the one in the middle of the field here was just an unnamed Long Barrow, because there are indeed hundreds in this area. So our story does indeed focus on Hazelton North and how it helps us understand so much about this era of history. So you probably know what DNA is, and studies of that in the archaeological sense have studied relationships over a long period. We have thousands of samples of ancient DNA, and yet almost none related to a multi-generational family. This Long Barrow, Hazelton North, well, it had long been excavated many years ago, but in 2021 a new study, a new paper set to try and understand the relationship of the individuals found in there using DNA analysis, more modern techniques than we've ever had before. Over 35 individuals were analysed, and my goodness me, it didn't disappoint. First and foremost, we already knew when this was built, sometime between 3695 BC and 3650 BC, over the course of a 10-year period. Now bear in mind that was only 100 years or so before cereal and animal cultivation had been introduced onto this island. Every single ancestor before that period of those people placed in that Long Barrow would have lived on continental Europe. The single most important feature was the two L-shaped chambered areas. They are referred to as North and South. In each of these we see the remains of over 41 individuals, and this is where the first of many of our fascinations starts to take shape. Okay, so take a look again at the family tree, because we can now start to see, depending on the branch of the family that you belong to, well, that very much depends on where you would be placed in this Long Barrow, which chamber. We're not seeing many mixes, and if we are, I suspect there's a good reason for it. So we have one male here positioned at the top and centre, then 4 individual females whom he reproduced with. Most of the other individuals within this tomb were descended from these 4 females, so to some degree the right to be able to use this site was based on the descendants from one man. Now, whatever level of generation in that family that you were, well, you were placed in that burial chamber in a specific place based on the matriarch that you were descended from. Now, this is staggering. It shows us that those 4 females were held well in esteem in that community. It shows their place and their memories were lived on for a very long time. Now, there were 1 or 2 exceptions, but those exceptions again actually help us understand the Neolithic community better. For example, with female number 1, we find that she had another male partner whom she had 1 child with, who in turn had a partner and children of their own. This subset were all buried within the Long Barrow. This happened again in other parts of the family tree. We see 2 generations down. So not only does it tell us that we're looking at quite an organised community here, the burial chambers all relating to subsets of this one family, well, of course, it then also tells us about the bigger picture of this Long Barrow. You don't necessarily need to be blood related to that original male. This was really about the community as a whole. Now, I told you there was a problem with this family tree. Something missing, something omitted completely. I wonder if you've seen it yet. If you haven't, I'll let you ponder on that for a little bit more whilst we discuss something else quite staggering. So we now know this was built over a 10-year period late in the 36th century BC. We also know that by 3620 BC, the placement of people in here had stopped. So that's a 30 to 70 year period. Now this is important, and we'll come back to that very shortly. It also is worth noting that perhaps 10 to 30 years after use, part of the northern chamber had collapsed, hence why we see later in the period some of the north generation placed within the southern chamber. So we have a period of use of this Long Barrow between 30 to 70 years, thereabouts. thereabouts. Now that really confused me because, well, I didn't have kids until I was like 29, and of course I'm wondering now how you would get 5 generations of family into that shorter period of time. I tend to put my life and circumstances onto these people that lived 5,700 years ago. But then it dawns upon you that this is indeed 5,700 years ago, and perhaps they were having children a lot younger than we are today. For example, adult NC2F died at some point between the age of 17 and 25, having already had 2 children. I'll combine that with the next staggering thing, and yes, I am overusing the word staggering, the people placed within that burial mound, that Long Barrow, well, they weren't placed there immediately after their deaths. Perhaps that might help us explain why it was only used for a short period of time. We know this for a number of reasons, not least that their bones had been gnawed before they were placed in the burial chamber. Did they wait until they had full-blown skeleton on their hands and then place the bones in there? Were they placed somewhere else first? Was this part of their whole ritual? I think the most important thing that this tells us, that the builders of the Long Barrow at Hazelton North, and of course even others like this one, was they anticipated this subset of family groups, or perhaps they even already knew about it. Now, before this DNA study took place, well, we thought that there was around 3 different generations in the Long Barrow. That's because it was open for such a short period of time. We now know from the analysis that we have 5 generations here, and that in itself gives us first of 2 problems, because there was also a study of strontium oxide stable isotope on the teeth, which suggests that 22 of the individuals sampled had spent some of their childhood on geology that was at least 40 kilometres away from this site. So does that actually mean that this guy here at the top was actually one of the first Neolithic settlers in Britain, and he came here with members of his family that would ultimately build this Long Barrow? And of course then we have the other problem that we mentioned at the start of the video. What exactly is wrong with this family tree? Did you spot it, is the question. Because if we look across it, in every lineage that we have here, we find no adult females. Now you might think this is obvious, we have a very parenilineal society, notwithstanding the importance of his wives in the community's memories. The females perhaps went on to find other communities to be part of, but what I find strange is that there are none on here, none stayed whatsoever. It was almost as if they were sent away once they reached maturity, no matter what. Well, this seems really odd, because considering the seemingly accepting nature of this society, we have stepfathers, we have their children all being included within this community and the Long Barrow and the placement within there. Well, this seems like a really extreme act, because we have absolutely no exceptions to this rule whatsoever. Now, back at Hazelton, I said to you that there was another Long Barrow just 80 metres away. Imagine if we had the DNA from that one too. The Hazelton example we've looked at today is just one example. What about the other 100, 120 Long Barrows within just 50 kilometres of that Hazelton site? Imagine what we could glean from those. This DNA study that we've looked at today, link in the description below, this study has been the first of its kind from that era to link 5 continuous generations of the Neolithic. And whilst it probably shouldn't be used as a template, of course, for exactly how Neolithic early Britain looked, but perhaps it did give us a lot more questions and a lot more information about that era. And I guess the question I always ask and always want to ask is, how do we make this investable? How do we make it that we can do more of these studies and learn more? Because this is just one of many opportunities we could be delving into. I've been Paul. I'll see you this time next week.